Harvard professor Shoshana Zuboff is sometimes called the Karl Marx of our time. Her monumental book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, exposed the dubious mechanisms of our digital economy. According to Zuboff, our personal and private experiences have been hijacked by Silicon Valley and used as the raw material for extremely profitable digital products.
The term surveillance capitalism is not an arbitrary term. Why surveillance? Because it must be operations that are engineered as undetectable, indecipherable, cloaked in rhetoric that aims to misdirect, obfuscate, and just downright bamboozle all of us all the time. I think we should be aware of that the digital world that has formed itself around us and the road to a digital future that we're on right now is something that has been hijacked by what I regard as a rogue economic logic that I call, of course, surveillance capitalism. The surveillance capitalists have tried to get us to believe that their practices are the inevitable outgrowth of digital technologies. If we want digital, then we have to go along with their surveillance operations and the consequences of those operations.
And we're talking about Google, we're talking about Facebook.
Yes, Google and Facebook are the pioneers. Amazon and Microsoft have piled on. But really, over the last 20 years, surveillance capitalism, it first became the default economic model in the tech sector, but now we see it moving through the normal economy. You know, whether you look at insurance, education, healthcare, retail, real estate, even right back into manufacturing and basic services. It begins with these companies claiming, unilaterally claiming, our private human experience as their free source of raw material. So what do they do with that raw material? They lift out of it the rich predictive signals in our behavior, and they turn that into data. These behavioral data, you can think of it as a complex set of pipes, supply chains. So the behavioral data now is scraped from our experience, it goes into the supply chains, then it gets tipped onto the conveyor belts and right into the new factories. What happens in those factories? Well, that's where we talk about things like artificial intelligence, machine intelligence. The new factories are computational. Right now in London, there's a lot of discussion about the CCTV cameras everywhere who are taking everybody's faces without their knowledge, therefore without their permission and so on. And there's a lot of controversy about this. But what everyone needs to know is that the tech companies, the private sphere, has fought for the right to take our faces from any kind of public space, to take our faces off the web.
Have they got that right?
They have, well, certainly in the US, they have that right. They have unilaterally claimed the right, and no government in the US, all during the years of the Obama administration, and since then, no government has obstructed that right. So Anywhere that you are in a public space, certainly in the US, the tech companies can take your face. Why do they want your face so badly? Well, first of all, obviously, it's very important to know who's doing what and where they're going and where they are and so forth. But there are even deeper reasons. There are many, many muscles in the face, and those muscles can combine into hundreds of different kinds of gestures. They do facial recognition analysis to compute those gestures because those gestures predict emotion. And once they know what you're feeling, that becomes one of the most powerful predictors of your behavior. They say, we have so much detailed data on behavior and emotion from 6.4 million young, teenage, and young adult people who live in New Zealand and Australia. And through this intense depth and range of data, we know their emotional cycles through every day and through the week. All of its mechanisms and methods, all of its data, all derive from surveillance capitalism, simply pivoting those operations a few degrees from trying to acquire guaranteed commercial outcomes to instead trying to achieve guaranteed political outcomes for a political customer, if you will, in this case, a secretive software billionaire who owned that company and was using it to manipulate the public for his political aims. Privacy is not private. Privacy is social, it is societal, and it is a collective action problem, not an individual problem. How do we solve collective action problems? Matt, we solve them with law. We solve them with democracy. So there is one thing that surveillance capitalists fear. It may not be me as an individual or you as an individual or your son or daughter as an individual. But what they fear is all of us mobilized together now, switched on, with our eyes wide open, no longer prey to this bamboozlation. Interesting story. Mark Zuckerberg in April of 2019 is up on the stage announcing to his people, privacy is the future, right? So all of us, our heads are kind of cracking because, how do we make sense of this strange moment? But then just a month later in June, Facebook's counsel is arguing in a California courtroom where a group of people have brought a class action suit. And the idea of this suit is we want to know from Facebook, what is our Facebook data that was shared with Cambridge Analytica that allowed them to target us for political ends, for pernicious political goals? We want those data. And the Facebook counsel is arguing to the judge that anyone who goes on Facebook, likely to be sharing with at least 100 people in a network, has no reasonable expectation of privacy. If you participate in Facebook, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy, and therefore you have no standing in a courtroom arguing for privacy. Well, this is something extraordinary now, because in order to do their business and make money, they have to have great predictions to sell. That means they're selling certainty to their business customers. In order to have predictions that get close to certainty, first of all, they have to have a lot of data. That means what we call economies of scale. They have to have varieties of data. That means economies of scope. And then they've learned that the very best data comes from intervening in our behavior to actually learn how to shove us in a direction that will be convenient for their bottom line. So now they're actually learning how to modify our behavior in ways that are remote and automated and can be scaled. So the bottom line here, Matt, is that surveillance capitalism undermines democracy from below, from the roots, but also from above. So let's just talk about that very quickly. From above, it creates a society of intense inequality. In the industrial world, the big inequality was economic inequality, and that defined the conflicts of the past century, and rightly so. In our century, the big conflicts are about not the division of labor, not what we do so much and what we earn so much as what we learn, what knowledge we have access to. That determines our life chances in today's society and an information society. Now we enter this new world of an information society marked by these extreme inequalities. Yes, the internet has given us access to all kinds of knowledge, but at the level of our social order and how authority and power are distributed, we now live in a world where, see, in 1986, 1% of information was digitalized. In 2013, 98% of information was digitalized. Most of what went digital is all of the information about our lives, because we've either put it online or they've extracted it from our lives. So now we have this world where we know almost nothing about them and they know everything about us. This puts them at the top of the social hierarchy. And we are distracted from this deep new inequality precisely because I can get online and I can look up things that would have taken me a while to look in the encyclopedia or go to the library, but now it's instant. Inequality, economic justice was the key dimension of social conflict in the last century. Now, we're going to see a new axis of social conflict where we're fighting for equality of knowing, that it's not okay for a small group to know everything about us while we know nothing about them and not nearly as much about ourselves or each other. This puts us at a disadvantage. Why? Because knowledge equals control. And as we've seen, they go over this tipping point. The data scientists call it the tipping point between monitoring and actuation, when you can know so much about a system that it allows you to actually automate that system. And now what we're moving into is a society where they use this vast wealth of knowledge about us to learn how to tune and herd our behavior remotely, always through the medium of the digital, toward those ends that serve their purposes. Let's talk a minute, if we could, about also how democracy is eroded from below. Because as they try to control us, herd us in the direction, as Pokemon Go did, of their commercial outcomes, this is a direct assault on human autonomy. So more certainty for them means less freedom for us. And that means that autonomy, self-determination, human agency, these qualities that we cherish and without which a democratic society is impossible to imagine, these qualities are always in surveillance capitalism sites. So this economic logic is on a collision course with our freedom, our personal freedom, our agency, our will, just as it's on a collision course with our equality as a society and our ability to have justice and equality over three key questions. Who knows? Who decides who knows? And who decides who knows? Those are the questions of knowledge, authority, and power that define the nature, the justice, and the equality of our future.